Hey everyone.
Hello.
So it's Sarah and Neil here bringing you today's episode of Uplift. And today we have got a very special guest hailing in from Sydney. We've got Jo Jackson, who is a high performance and flow coach for professionals. So welcome, Jo. Nice to see you.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here.
Wonderful to have you. So I was just in the back room. I was just complaining. No, I was praising that we had just made it to +4 today, and I'm almost afraid to ask what temperature it's in Perth or in Sydney today. Almost afraid. What's the temp in Sydney?
We're heading around about 27 at the moment. It's just come into autumn and it still feels quite a bit like summer.
Oh. And Sarah?
We've had an unusual bout of thunderstorms happening in Perth at the moment. It's about 23 degrees, but it is very great skies and very unusual for Perth. But it's a pretty fabulous day right here, right we are right now.
Sweet.
So, guys, we are hailing from all over the world for this beautiful conversation. And please, if you'd like to get involved, drop us some comments. We'd love to hear your feedback, or if you've got any specific questions to ask Jo as we go along, please drop them in. She is an absolute expert in her field, and we would love to hear from you. Anyway, Jo, to get us started, I wonder if you could just introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. Well, my name is Jo Jackson and I am a high performance and flow coach for professionals. So most people really wouldn't have a great understanding of what that is, not because of any other reason other than flow is a relatively new concept for a lot of people. Flow's actually been around for quite some time, but we haven't been able to effectively teach people how to step into it. And that's why I work with flow as well as high performance, because effectively you can be a high performer, but still not be able to step into flow. When actual fact, flow is a massive increase in productivity. So effectively, that's where we should all be heading towards.
Right, so it's that increase in productivity is what you're referring to, flow in. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Drew, what are some common mistakes that you've noticed people have in regards to their flow?
Wow, so many. Because it's such a new science to so many people, we often step into it the wrong way. There's a lot of people out there that talk about how you can step into flow using things like psychedelics. And it is common, yes, you can step into flow using psychedelics, because effectively what you want to do is shut down your prefrontal cortex. And of course, psychedelics is the quickest way to go about doing that, not necessarily the safest. People are also of the impression that flow is something that you can step into frequently and you can stay in for long periods of time. Unfortunately, that's not the case at the moment, unless you're giving yourself some kind of stimulant, purely because the dopamine levels in the brain are depleted when you step into flow. So you need to replenish those.
Are there any foods that will help that flow to that maintain? Because obviously, as we're talking and communicating and problem solving and everything that we need to do in our daily lives, are you aware of anything that can help to support us in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of things that can help support flow in your life. One of the main factors in that is by reducing stress in your life. And that's where the high performance side of my business comes in. Because effectively, we want to be able to step into flow as much as possible. But if we don't take care of the other elements of our life, then flow will be one of those things that comes intermittently. Most people experience flow very, very rarely. And if you think back on a time in your life, you can probably think, oh yeah, I remember that one time where I was at this place doing this thing and time didn't matter. And then all of a sudden I seemed to come out of this trance where I got a lot done. But I can't say that's really happened very often. That's a very common response from people. But when you talk about flow and how it can happen and the feelings that people remember from having had it, everybody wants it again. But of course, there's fundamentals to allowing it to happen. You're not going to have a life where you can step into flow more frequently if you're not generally looking after basic elements of your existence, your attitude, your mindset, your health, spirituality. All of these elements set the scene and create a strong foundation of being able to slip into flow quicker.
Makes sense. Yeah. Is anybody here who's watching us live? Let us know if you're experiencing some flow problems. Drop us a comment.
So the masculine in me goes, okay, because I make things happen. What's the difference between make things happen and flow?
The simple response to that is intention. So there's a sweet spot where the flow state kicks in, where something's just hard enough and just interesting enough, where you unconsciously slip into this space where time doesn't exist and you become so absorbed in it that it makes it happen. So I understand the masculine part of you that says, oh, I'm not quite sure about that. That seems a little bit woo-woo to me. But it's heavily backed by neuroscience and by a lot of studies through the extreme sports world as well about how we can actually utilize flow more beneficially and what we're actually doing in our lives to remove us from flow. Because in certain cultures, the experience of flow is quite natural and everyday. In the Western culture, for us, it's such a foreign concept, it almost seems unbelievable.
So how are you in? We've just lost Sarah. So Sarah was leading today's adventures, and we just lost Sarah because maybe of a thunderstorm. But how are you bringing this? How are you bringing flow into the traditional concept of the professional? Like in the corporate world, flow, I don't think enters the conversation easily. So how are you working with professionals to bring it into their world and make it not woo-woo?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Neil. In actual fact, most of us utilize flow without realizing what it is. And for those high performing professionals, that's what they seek every day by planning their day and by utilizing their time to the best of their ability. For professionals who work at that high end, we understand when we are the most efficient in certain areas, when we're the most creative, when we're the most analytical, when we are the most administrative. And so therefore we will, as much as possible, schedule our days around that. So there's certain factors within that which will in turn create an environment where flow becomes more likely. But in actual fact, the majority of professionals that I speak to already experience flow, but they don't realize what's called.
Oh, because the concept of
Interesting.
the term flow is so new, but the actual implementing it is not. It's a time-honored, in some cases. Not everyone is in the flow.
No, not as we speak about it in this context, no. Whilst there are others that perhaps remain in the flow quite consistently throughout various means.
Yeah. And welcome back, Sarah.
Hi. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm back to join you in our conversation. So I know that scheduling has been an issue for me, and guys, if scheduling has been an issue for you in the past, drop it down below. I spoke to Joe about this would have been about 8 months or so ago now, wouldn't it, Joe?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And I started implementing slightly different one of the a high performance planner by Brenda Bashard, and that's been great. Joe gave me some pretty cool tips with that. I'm curious if there's like anything you would like to share about scheduling, Joe.
Yeah, I can share with you an outline of generally what I do with regards to scheduling and some of the fundamental mistakes that people make. One of the biggest mistakes I see with scheduling is people have this resistance to it. They think that if you're a scheduler, you're too disciplined, and that equates to you not being a fun person and not living life well. And therefore, how could you possibly be the type of person that I want to associate with? You're too serious, you schedule everything. Well, in actual fact, by scheduling things, you free yourself up to be creative and to have more fun. Because what that means is you're no longer thinking about all of the things that you need to get done. You've released that through your mind by saying, I have it down on a piece of paper. I know when I need to get it done. And therefore, I also know that it hasn't been done and I can reschedule it back in. Typically in society, what we do is we avoid it. We call it the elephant in the room and say, I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. And then all of a sudden in the professional world, the deadline's there. We create for ourselves a sense of stress. And as a result of that, we're forced to perform. Well, we might do enough to get by, but we will never perform at our best while creating that sense of stress in our lives. What we're better off doing is scheduling it, as you and I worked on. And the High Performance Planner is my tool of choice, purely because it has additional elements of those other aspects that are required to step into play, like gratitude, like forward planning and future proofing, like things of what can I do for somebody else? It's not just about me. So these other elements are foundational to be able to have a better experience, not just in your professional life, but also in life in general. And it all flows to everything else. I find that people that don't schedule come into my practice and start to use scheduling initially are quite resistant, but we start small. With my coaching business, I use what I call 2mm shifts. And the 2mm shifts are just small things. I'll work with my clients about what the end goal is. We'll talk about 12 monthly or 6 monthly goals, and we will work backwards from there. And 100% of the time, people feel immensely relieved at seeing what's in front of them. It often can be followed up with a sense of frustration and a bit of pressure, because they may realize they've actually overcommitted, or they may realize that something's coming up, like a birthday, for instance, and I meant to do something for birthday and now I've run out of time. And this is the elephant in the room, this awareness that we avoid. And this is the awareness that we really want to promote by utilizing planning and discipline, because then you're not using up this additional energy thinking about something constantly. You've put it down and you know what needs to be done.
Yeah, for sure. I know that when I had a lot of my schedule in my head, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you do forget. There's a lot of stuff you don't get to. And even when you have things written down, but you're not really specific about that really made a difference. So for me now, I'm in the habit of the first of every month, I think about what I want to do for the month, and then work backwards. What is my outcome for the month, and go backwards from there. And it's working brilliantly. Yeah.
Lovely. I'm so glad to hear that, Sarah. A lot of people, they start off with the discipline and it gets too hard, so they don't follow through with it. So I'm really pleased to hear that you're following through and getting the benefits from it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So on that note, Joe, you mentioned that lack of motivation. What tips would you give people about motivating to get into that scheduling and to really create that flow so that they are at a peak performance in their life?
Yeah, that's another really good question. You know what? We need to modify our expectations realistically. A lot of people think that they can achieve things in a very unrealistic space of time, and then they set their schedule on the basis of that unrealistic space of time. And then they get disappointed with themselves and give themselves a hard time through shame and guilt because they didn't achieve something that was actually unachievable to start with. So that's one of the biggest things that becomes a problem with people in this sort of space. Another thing is that they have multiple lists going on. So when they're talking about time management, they'll have a list in their planner, they'll have a list on the fridge, they'll have a list for the kids, they'll have a list for their personal life. And because they're all not consistent, then you feel like you're constantly clutching at straws trying to get things done. But you also do yourself out of that sense of fulfillment for achieving something. And I can see Jeanette's asked a question here about, is this a kind of advanced time management? Jeanette, that's a really good question. Flow is not so much about advanced time management, but about how to use your neurology to your best potential to enable yourself to enhance productivity by picking set things at set times of day and knowing your circadian rhythms well to understand how you can maximize what you can do.
So Neil, do you find do you get more stuff happening in the morning, the afternoon, or evening?
That back to the circadian rhythm, back to what it is that I'm doing. I like to run at lunchtime. I like to run write in the mornings. I like to review things in the evening. So when I know those, and that's by trial and error. If I've run outside of those times, because that's the easiest one. Because I can measure performance. I have a watch that I know that my pace is this at noon, and then before or after, it can just really go wonky.
And quite often we're told by other people what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. In actual fact, what we should be doing is finding the tool that works for us. So I'm a qualified Jay Shetty, life and success coach. And I often get asked, why did you get qualified with Jay? And the answer is simple. Jay has a lot of tools and methodologies that align completely to the holistic view that I have on coaching and of life in general. So whilst you'll find a person, Neil, for instance, that will tell you you should never exercise at lunchtime, you should always exercise first thing in the morning so you start your day right, that clearly doesn't work for you. So it's not necessarily a case of you need to change, it's you need to find what works according to how you are currently structured.
I'm not knocking. I'm currently reading Robin Sharma's The 5 a.m. Club, and for lots of really great information, but the thought of getting up at 5 a.m. to run just doesn't work. But the thought, I've done races, most races like marathons start at unearthly hours, and for that first hour, it's not fun.
No, I agree. I've run a couple of half marathons, very similar. Well, I'm a member of the 5 a.m. club, and I must admit, I am a natural early riser. So for me, that was quite simple to implement as part of my strategy to get the most out of my day. But likewise, I also know people that you cannot get up before 8 o'clock. And it doesn't mean that you can't change what time you get up. It just starts talking about the motivation to change that. Are you intrinsically or extrinsically motivated to make that shift? So if you're intrinsically motivated, i.e. you motivate yourself, then you'll find a reason to get up at 5 a.m. and you'll make that work for you. But if you're extrinsically motivated and you read a book like Robin Sharma that says get up at 5 a.m. and you go, well, you know, that kind of works for them. And unless anyone's going to tell me that I'm going to get great inroads from and praise me, then I'm going to stay getting up at 8 a.m. Thank you very much.
Yep. No, I don't mind getting up early in the morning. It's just the thought of doing that is just like, okay. But I will write. Yeah, I will get up at early in the morning to write, because I'm an author. I've written 3 books that have been international best-selling books, spiritual fiction, and most of those, my best work was written early in the morning.
Yeah. So you've gotten to know your circadian rhythms and how you work best at what times. Most people don't. Most people have no idea. They go to work and they just do what they're supposed to do throughout the course of the day. Very task focused, no real strategy and structure to getting the best out of their day. It becomes just get the task done.
I've started implementing something that I don't know if you guys do, but I have an hour towards the end of my day where I set aside to work on the things that throughout the day that I've scheduled, that maybe some things have sort of gone over time. So I step back. Hey, Mary Grace, thanks for joining us. So yeah, I've got this hour in the afternoon where I step back and go, okay, what didn't I quite get done? And I find in that last hour, that's actually when a lot of the flow happens. It's really quite interesting. Yes. It's been great to see. And also it's good knowing that I've made the bigger decisions earlier in the day, and it's just a case of maybe, you know, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, or tying up those loose ends, so to speak, so that I can actually, you know, have that whole finished and not carried on to the day. Do you guys set aside any time in your day, and if so, for how long and when?
It's really important that you bookend your day, having an AM routine and a PM routine. So both of those involve me setting some time aside. With a 5 a.m. start in the mornings for me, as you can imagine, I'm into it pretty quickly. But I make sure that in my evenings, I have time set aside. I have parental responsibilities, which effectively means I'm bouncing all over the place with those. But I've learned how to make sure that I still allow time for my non-negotiables. And one of my non-negotiables is that reflection every evening. It doesn't necessarily happen just before I retire for the night. Sometimes it's a couple of hours earlier, but it always takes place. And it's necessary for me to focus on the next day, but also to allow myself to feel a sense of achievement for what I've achieved that day. And as you do, Sarah, take a look at, well, what happened today that didn't quite go according to plan? And is there something I need to learn from that? Or is that just one of those one-off things that happens?
They're important questions for sure. And I know Neil started implementing these. Since you started asking those questions, what changes have you noticed?
life is. Oh, I was just. I'm back at Joe's question of the non-negotiables. I
Yeah.
love that and most people don't really get because they think it's selfish. How did you arrive? How did you two arrive at this concept of a non-negotiable, something that you just have to do?
Well, I must admit, in my case, it was through necessity. I was one of those people that was thrust into a situation whereby I needed to make ends meet. And me being the person that I am, I don't take no for an answer and I never lie down. So it was find a way. That was my motto for the first 2 years of my life when I became a single parent. It was always find a way, get resourceful, find a way. And more often than not, the response was get another job, take on another contract, do more work. And that worked really, really well because I've always been exceptionally fit and healthy, so I didn't really ever get sick until one day in January 2018 when I walked myself into a hospital at the advice of a GP who was genuinely concerned about my health. I'd just come back from 10 days holiday. I should have been rested, relaxed, ready to start work again in a couple of weeks' time and feeling fabulous. Instead, I was immensely depleted, fatigued, and in immense pain. So I did what I was told to do against my better judgment. I should have gone 24 hours earlier when I was told, but I had single parent responsibilities, which I don't drop. I make sure I do them. And so when I finally got my mum to take me to hospital, I could barely see. I had a headache that was a migraine. I could barely walk, and I was in extreme pain. I gave the letter to the triage nurse. They took me out the back, triaged me, and my pulse was so low, they brought out the crash cart. Effectively, what had happened is I was very, very sick. And about an hour later, I get greeted in the triage room with the chief hematologist and the chief oncologist asking me questions like, do you have HIV? And have you had chemotherapy recently? Or have you traveled to any Asian countries or South American countries? They're trying to troubleshoot and find out why my white cell count was so low. Effectively, what happened is 8 days in isolation. I got transferred to a hematology unit immediately with what was dying cancer patients. I was left in a room isolated completely with a sign on my door that said infectious disease. So gowns, gloves, masks, the whole works. And it took them 4 days to find out what was wrong with me. After lumbar punctures, you name it, I had practically every test there was. And they finally worked out I'd contracted a virus because my body had started producing antibodies. But the thing is, I'd had the virus for a long time. My body had been fighting it, but I didn't know I was sick because I didn't know what to look for because my mentality was just get it done. And that's how I came about needing to schedule and needing to do things differently. I walked out of that hospital. The doctor quite clearly told me that I was on the verge of death. I laughed. I thought he was kidding, but it was backed up by the surgeon who confirmed that I actually was very close to death. And if somebody had have sneezed on me with a common cold, my immune system couldn't have fought it. So it was dire, and I didn't even have any idea. So I had no choice but to either run the risk of repeating that or to change my life. So I came out of that experience very, very grateful for the fact that I'd been saved, with a sense of purpose. Clearly, I was saved for something greater than what I was already doing. And the first thing I did was I took a serious look at how I was running my life. And the biggest wake-up call for me was the fact that I already had all of the tools that I needed. I just wasn't implementing them properly.
Yeah. I'm wondering if anybody watching live can drop a comment if this is something you're experiencing. You know, you have the knowledge, but maybe you're not actually implementing it. Yeah, I know that's something that I've personally done in the past, and viewers, let us know. Neil, have you had this problem too?
No, never push myself to the point of exhaustion. Yeah.
No. Of course not. No. Not allowed to admit anyway.
And I think one of the simplest ways to me is it's when people have really strong warrior energy and I personally, then I forget to look at what it's doing to me, because you, as in Joe's case, you have a family, parental responsibility, so you cannot fail. And in my case, I just have a wife and a cat to look after, but failure to me, it was just never, and it still is not an option. It's like I hurt my back yesterday, and I was already thinking about, oh, I could go for a run today.
Determination and craziness. It's a strange combination, isn't it?
To find balance.
There's a verge of stupidity involved in, and I will admit I own my stupidity.
But it's also about getting back on that horse, like not letting that fear about, hurting yourself or harming yourself stop you from doing the things that you love. And Neil, I know you love to run. So there's got to be an element in there of, wanting to get back on the horse, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. So how do you balance flow for yourself, Joe, and the discipline? How does, in your mind, how is flow and discipline in there? Because you're self-driven, you're motivated, and how do you balance flow with your high need to I'm going to say, get things done?
Yeah, the way that I do it personally, and I'll preface by saying it's different for everybody. Everybody finds their own way to make this happen, because whilst we're all inherently human, we always work a little bit differently to each other, whilst also being very similar. So for me, it's by giving myself permission. For me to step into flow, I needed to change my mindset on what was required, because in actual fact, I needed to let go of the discipline a little bit to enable my brain to do what it's capable of doing. But whilst I was constantly trying to control it, I was missing the opportunity. So the first thing I needed to learn was how to step back, how to literally just step into myself and say, go. And I'd never given myself permission to do that before. I'd never known how or why. And I never really was aware of the significant benefits. But once I started implementing that in my life at the right time of day and understanding better the circumstances to make that happen, I noticed it became more prevalent. And you get to the point where you actually want to experience it more and more, not like an addiction, but because you know how much you can get done and you look forward to the sense of achievement.
Wonderful. I'm just like, because masculine warrior energy, well, is can be a beautiful thing when you harness it with discipline, but it also, in my mind, takes discipline to stay in the flow, to recognize that the flow is a good thing, so that you're not forcing things to occur and to have happen. So in your view, what are some of the things that people do wrong to get them out of the flow?
They become very aware. So one of the easiest ways to step out of flow is to step into awareness. So you start looking around, looking for the time or looking for something to ground you. More often than not, people that are in flow, they don't do that. But the easiest way to get out of it is to start doing that, to start looking around for things that look familiar or that give you an indication of time and space. When you start to slip into flow, however, you literally, for most people, they do slip. So they don't bring themselves out of it per se because they're not usually aware that they're in it. But for those people who are more practiced, let's say, at stepping into flow, we're aware of the fact that you can pull yourself out of it purely by looking for something to confirm time and space. And automatically that re-engages your prefrontal cortex. And by nature, flow doesn't exist.
Cool. I need to read. We've got a long missive from Bruce, and I need to read it first. So I'm going to so I'll let you, Sarah, continue on before I flash it up on the screen here.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for watching, Bruce. Great to have you here. I am a creative person, as I know all of you know, and plenty of the viewers know that I'm creative. I find that I tend to get into a creative flow, and it's probably quite different to your experience, Joe, but I get lost in time. what I think might take, half hour or an hour, actually it turns out it's been closer to 2 hours, and I was just in the moment so much. And again, my definition of flow and your definition of flow maybe aren't quite exactly the same, but when I'm in that moment, I'm just really zoned in. And you're right, I'm not looking at the time, I'm not looking at the things. I'm just concentrating on me.
No.
It's quite wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. It's flow can actually be considered to be quite selfish, because in actual fact you do need to disconnect from everything around you in order to be able to step into it. So that's also one of the great things about it. It gives us permission to go and just be ourselves. And when you've got the skill that's just hard enough, and you've got the interest that is just balanced enough, automatically you'll just go there. Unless you check yourself by confirming your surroundings, then you might want to make that neurological path, but you will physically be stopping yourself without knowing. It's really all about also understanding individually what is that space that we hit where it's just hard enough that it's a push for us, so it doesn't come easily, but we're also just interested in enough that we don't get stressed by it. So it's this very, very fine spot where, as you've just said, Sarah, you find it and you just go for it, and you come out the other end and realize that you've done something immensely creative, and maybe even something that you didn't expect, because when you shut down your prefrontal cortex, you shut down judgment.
Questioning
so all of those
goes
things
out
stop
the
you from
window.
being
Yeah.
you. They go right out the window. They don't matter anymore. All of those things, those inhibitions, those fears that we implement in our own lives and we manifest through our actions and our beliefs, they're not there anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And to get back to what Bruce was just saying about having PTSD, and I know Bruce used to work in a prison and was in a pretty bad space. Obviously, a bit of vicarious trauma and things dealing with day-to-day life in that prison. And he mentioned that he had PTSD last year, and he was physically fit. At the time, not emotionally stable, and then he ran into Brendan Burchard's stuff and started making amazing changes in his life. And I know he's actually now a certified high performance coach too, and Bruce has changed his life immensely because of these tips that we're sharing now. I had post-traumatic stress too, and had a different way of dealing it. I'm curious if either of you have any tips with high performance, with flow, and maybe some sort of mental illness of any kind.
You mean dealing with mental illness?
Yeah, but well, in regards to questioning ourselves, there's that, talking about turning off that prefrontal cortex to get into the flow, and a lot of people struggling with mental illness, from what I've noticed, tend to be constantly thinking. So how do you get out of that constant thinking mode to switch off to get into that flow, is what I'm asking.
Like what I do with everything, really, and this is actually a Brendan Burchard tip as well, you use your triggers. So in society at the moment, we're having big discussions, open discussions about triggers, but they're actually being held in a negative connotation. And you see things like statements like, oh, you triggered me. Well, in actual fact, a trigger can be used predominantly to change your state as well in a positive way. For instance, when I know that it's my creative time according to my circadian rhythms, I know that I will more naturally step into flow during that space in the day. So what I do is I create for myself a psychological trigger. In my office at home, which I'm clearly not in at the moment, I have a nice big white fluffy beanbag. I haven't filled it with beans, I filled it with foam. And I filled it with foam because then it doesn't make sound, because sound creates time and space. So I fill it with foam, and when I want to step into my creative space, that is my trigger. I'll make sure that I go and step into the space where the bag is. I've got my things around me that I want to utilize to maximize, whether it's my iPad or whether it's my Otter to translate my my vocal or whatever it is. I've got that around me, and I will just allow myself to relax and give myself that time. Now, because the schedule is so jam-packed, that time is very important to me. So the trick therefore becomes, how often do I do it to make it viable? Because the whole intention is to not be aware of time and space, which is why I will do it at the end of the day. Because then I know if I get into a zone and it does take up a significant amount of time, I have nowhere to be. So I don't have this constant thought of, I've only got an hour, I've only got half an hour. Instead, it's, well, I'm ready for whatever happens tonight and wherever it goes. And I've triggered my mind by saying, okay, we're in our spot. Let's see what happens now.
I can relate to that as an artist, getting that stuff out of your head for sure. It's brilliant. Yeah. Neil, I can see you smiling big time there. I feel like you have something to contribute to this conversation.
June 12th, 2012, I had a self-inflicted brain trauma. I was a bad boy and I didn't brush my teeth. So we were removing the mercury because the doctors discovered I had high mercury levels in my body. We were removing the mercury and it didn't go very well. And I had a catastrophic loss of memory to the point where I could be talking to either anyone in front of me, turn around and have no recollection of the conversation. Zero. I could get lost in my neighborhood. So, and certain things, like I knew what a GPS was and I knew where I lived and I could get home, but I couldn't recognize things. So that was absolutely terrifying to be able to know that I couldn't trust parts of me. But the upside to all of this is I learned to truly listen from a place of interest and a place of understanding what you were telling me, because I had no reference if we'd ever met before. So now I was truly entranced and excited to meet you. So in this case, a brain scared shitless of saying things because I could be perceived as wrong, shame, guilt, because I have this brain. But the gift was that I learned to really, really listen.
So you were able to harness presence in its true sense. There is so much freedom when we understand how to become truly present. I find that a lot of people think that they're present when in actual fact they're not. Because whilst you might be face to face with somebody having a conversation, you may be disciplined enough to move your phone, put it in a bag where you can't see it, for instance. You're still looking at what's going on behind the person as you look over their shoulder while you're having the conversation. You're not being present. But in order to be completely present, that's exactly what you've just defined. You've got no judgments, you've got no preconceived notions, you've got no expectations, and you're fully immersed in that conversation with that person.
Absolutely. Complete. You've got it completely. And on one hand, it's beautiful for me to have come out of it, but on another hand, it's kind of disheartening because the focus I had before for conversations was different. And yeah, I've noticed that the interrupter in me is less, but it's more than it used to be.
So do you miss feeling like that? Do you have enough of a memory of feeling like that to have missed it?
Absolutely. And I take the time to go back to it. I make the time to, especially if somebody I've never met before on their first time, I become an excited little kid to go, oh, someone new. And I want to know, because then I pay attention to their body language and I really suss them up, like up, down, toes. I'm not afraid to look them completely all over to figure out and allow my heart to see who they are truly.
And that's tapping into the beauty of curiosity as well. One of the other ways to step into flow is to increase curiosity in your life, curiosity and wonder. There is a YouTuber named Jason Silver who works with an American scientist called Steve Kotler. Jason Silver does amazing stories on YouTube, and whenever he shoots, he is in flow. And you can tell because he spills quotes and language, and he calls it aesthetic arrest, where you see something so beautiful, you're almost just gasping and you can't stand still. His language and the way he uses dialect and the beauty of the English language in its full capacity is, it creates a sense of cognitive ecstasy, is what he calls it, where you hear someone speak and you're just completely engrossed, and you could just sit there and listen to him for hours because of that. So Jason was one of the first people that actually started me on the journey of flow around about 18 months ago, where I started looking into, why is this guy so articulate? He must have a photographic memory. How can he do what he does? And I started to follow his journey and found Steve Kotler as a result of that. And it's just amazing how looking at things differently. And with him, he's all about wonder and awe.
Did I get
wonder
that right?
and awe. S-I-L-V-A. Yeah,
Oh.
Jason, S-I-L-V-A.
Okay,
Born in Venezuela, had a very non-standard upbringing, but this man is absolutely exceptional. He's also immensely empathetic. He feels like an empath, and he advocates exactly what the Western world doesn't. We're also busy being productive and getting results and being successful. We don't schedule in time for curiosity and wonder and awe, because that's what the kids do. You know, we're big adults now. We don't have time for all that. When in actual fact, if you want to step into flow more often, the number one key to stepping into flow is adult play. Literally, adult play. Have more fun in a kid-like way as an adult. Shut down that judgment that we have developed over years and years, and return to the state of a child.
It's a beautiful thing to go into that state of play. You know, when you go into that state of play, as you mentioned, all these beautiful things happen, but also your problem-solving skills increase, and your ability to perform at a higher level is just exponential, because you've allowed yourself to be present in the moment, have a play, enjoy life, and look at it like maybe from a bit more of a sociological point of view. So everything's new, just like through the eyes of a child, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
I call it seeing it again for the first time. So you can go and do something. I do this with my children. I'll take them out on a weekend, and we would have done it 6 or so months prior. We live in Sydney, but we'll go for a weekend every few months as tourists, and we'll see something again for the first time. But if we remember that we're constantly changing, then that's why you'll see something and go, oh, I never noticed that before. How come I've never seen that before? Because you're effectively looking at it through new eyes, because you've chosen to grow. And at that particular time, when you're in that particular space, your reticular activation system is looking for something completely different. So whereas you might have normally have seen one thing that you see all the time, this particular time, you're not looking for it. And you have something completely new that's amazing and wonderful, and it changes.
So I noticed personally, this happens to me, and guys, let us know in the comments. I've got a 4-year-old, and through the gift of her eyes, you know, I've learned to see things differently, just as Joe was sharing with us, you know, and really, you know, what is important about this, and cutting down the crap, and being present in that moment, and going with that flow, and enjoying being playful about some heavy conversations or some big concepts. Like we were talking about death recently, but we did it in a playful way, and we did it in a way that she asked questions that I hadn't actually thought of. And you know, as someone who's almost 40, you know, it was beautiful to have this 4-year-old asking me things that really got me thinking in a new way. And I'm sure there's a lot of other parents out there who experience this thing as well. You know, they so much growth from having a child ask you questions.
Absolutely. And as parents, we've got it backwards. We put our kids in front of screens and we give them iPads and DVDs and TVs to keep them quiet. But in actual fact, what we should be doing is spending time with our kids and saying, how do you see that? Because that is going to have immense benefits on us becoming more productive in our lives by allowing us to start to really release the shackles of all of these beliefs that we instill and all of these things that we've decided are gospel truths, when in actual fact, if you go through your timeline, the chances are you don't even know why you believe what you do. You've just always been told it, or you've just always known it, and you've never questioned it. But if you step into adult play, or if you take the mind of a child, you question everything. So you start to release some of that baggage that as adults we carry on to for dear life.
So on that note, Joe, I've interrupted Neil. We're in timer. I'm going to ask anyway. So on that note, what's something that you believed in the past that you no longer believe, Joe?
When I was brought up, I was obviously brought up by baby boomers, and I recognized that generation believed what they believed. Because I looked up to my father so much, I never questioned what I was told. And what I was told is, this is what you'll be. Because this is what I am, and this is the genetics that you come from, so this is what you'll be. So work towards that and do that effectively. I've got a post up on Facebook about it. I call it the Gen X promise. And the Gen X promise didn't work out for me, because otherwise I wouldn't be here doing this today. But the big thing that I thought I knew, and this is a classic example of beliefs, is I was only ever as smart as my genetics allowed me to be. Thank God for epigenetics. Thank God for Joe Dispenza, because as a Christian, that man was put on the face of this planet for people like me who just think it makes no sense that I'm limited. I don't understand it. How can I learn and be limited? So for me, I used to think that my intelligence was limited, that I could not be stronger, faster, and smarter, that I just was what I was. But as an adult who's done extensive research in this space and has been in personal development for a long time, I now know categorically that the person I stand here as today, with the intelligence that I have, with the strength that I have, is not the same person that will be standing here in a week, because I can grow that. Whereas once upon a time, I would never have thought that I could.
Sure. Great share. Thanks, Joe. Yeah.
For me, well, I still believe in the Easter Bunny. I still believe in Santa Claus. So I was really, I was still really, and then, but when I had to think about this, and then I went, the adage, because my dad's 83 years old, and I'm just a few years younger than him. So I was the adage of that money doesn't grow on trees. The scarcity thinking was, my dad was a state worker, a government worker, and he had 4 kids, and he was trying to provide. So money was not free and easy to have. So I was taught that business people, business people were, they're just a leech to society. They don't pay their taxes. They don't do all of these things. And it's the bones of the hardworking man. And you have to work hard to make the money. It has to be hard. If it's not hard and you don't get your hands dirty, it's not worthwhile doing. And all of that is so full of it. But that being said, it's what got me to realize that we need to work at what we love. So that lesson that it was hard and you had to get your hands dirty gave me the tools that I didn't want to do that. So I moved to find out what it is that I love and do what it is that I love. And that's what I'm doing.
And some of the most amazing people on the face of this planet have been born out of adversity. I mean, you look at the Tony Robbins story, what he went through with his mother was unbelievable. And the way that she used to beat him and treat him. And he will stand in front of any crowd and say, I love my mother, because if she hadn't done what she did, I would never have become the man that I became. I was meant to live the life that I lived so that I could understand and stand here the man that I am. And I think there's strength in that, because quite typically in Western society, we step into being a victim because this happened to me or that happened to me. Well, stuff's going to happen. It's called life. And if you're walking through with an expectation that because something happened to you 20 years ago, that's okay for you to have an attitude now, then I'll challenge that every day, because you show me the difficulty that you've been through in life, and I'll show you a child in Cambodia that goes through 10 times worse, wakes up every day with a smile on their face and has no hope for the future other than today. It's sunny.
And is begging and praying every morning to have the life that you're complaining about. Sarah, how about you?
My beliefs have changed around my belief in myself. I used to have anxiety and depression and PTSD, and I would get stuck in this cycle of I'm not good enough or I'm stupid. And belief and growth happened when I started questioning, is this really true? Well, I'm not stupid. I'm highly intelligent. I am growing and I'm learning and changing this stuff in my mind. Like, I love making mistakes now. Previously, it was, I've made another mistake. My posture would go down. Now, I've made a mistake. This is fantastic. What can I learn from this? Because as we've spoken about before, our past doesn't necessarily equal our present, and it certainly doesn't equal our future. We've got that ability to change. And had I not made these mistakes, had I not gone through everything I've gone through, and like Tony Robbins has been through, like we've all been through stuff. Have we not done that? We would be different people. Yeah. And I love that I'm resilient.
Yeah,
I love
and that just the reframing.
I've got this beautiful empathy working with other people now. Yes, that reframing is gold. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so critical. And it all comes back to freedom of choice and being able to be understanding enough to respect other people's choices, but also being wise enough to know that their choices do not have to reflect on your life.
Absolutely. So I'm noticing I'm noticing the time because we try to keep it under 59 minutes so that we can get it on Instagram. If we go over 59 minutes, Instagram gives us heck. So I'm just noticing the time. So if people want to work with you, Joe, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
So many ways. I am actually on Facebook under Joe Jackson. You can also find me on LinkedIn under Joe Jackson, or in 2 days, my brand new website is going to be launched. My website is called Master Your Potential. And of course, because I believe in making 2mm shifts, anyone can master their potential. And that's what I work towards, because for the majority of us, in fact, for pretty much all of us in life, we will never reach our potential because we don't know that we can, or we can't find someone to help us. So for me, it's all about master your potential, because it's always sitting there waiting for us to step into it. It's just up to us whether or not we're willing to take it. .com.au.
Pardon?
.com.au. So masteryourpotential.com.au. You can get me there. You can also look up Master Your Potential on Instagram. I'm on there. And I do inspirational posts, and I do very challenging thought processes there. I'll ask questions that will get you thinking, because it's only when you start questioning what you think you believe that you can step into something different. You'll never get where you're meant to be by doing what you've always done. You need to be willing to make constant 2mm shifts, be consistent with your approach, and have a dream that you know can be fulfilled. And that's the driving force.
And I would add to that, Joe, too. There's also, about having that imperfect action. Those 2mm shifts, you don't have to wait for the appropriate time, do you? Imperfect action is really quite important to continue to get the ball rolling, would you say?
The perfect time is always right now. I have gone from being, I don't take risks, to let's do it. Purely because I'm not scared anymore of failing, because I believe that there's no such thing as fail. I fail forward. And anytime something doesn't go the way I want to, I ask myself the 4 mastery questions. And the last one is, how do I do it different? So there's always learning. It's never something that's a mistake.
Just a learning opportunity.
Excellent. Well, what a fantastic eye-opening conversation, and I noticed some great questions coming through, and it was so good to have Joe here. Any last comments or questions, guys? Light up that chat screen. We are about to take off, though. In the meantime, have you got any final words that you might like to add, Joe?
Well, I'd like to leave you. Hi, Haran. Nice to see you. I'd like to leave anybody who watches this now or in the future with thought. On any given day that you wake up, can you honestly say to yourself, today I've reached my potential? And if the answer is no in any element of your life, then I encourage you to seek somebody that can help you reach it. Potential is not always something you can achieve on your own, because you've tried it on your own and you're not getting there. And there is absolutely nothing but power in reaching out to someone who can help you shortcut to your destination. That's why coaches exist. That's why we make sure that we educate ourselves and experience life fully, so that we can give you the benefits of our shortcuts. And coaches like yourself, Sarah, like myself, we live to serve. That's what we do. That's why we do it. And there's nothing satisfying for us than seeing someone hit their goals and then realize they've actually got more.
Yeah, and to get to that next level, or even sometimes they haven't recognized that their identity is already matched and they're going for that next level, and it's great to see their face when you bring that to their attention. You're like, oh, you've actually outgrown where you initially hoped to be. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yes.
Neil, have you got any final words?
Would like to leave our viewers, our listeners, that you are worthy of all of your hopes, dreams, and aspirations. All I ask is you reach out, take 1 2 millimeter step towards your goal. Know that you're loved and know that you are worthy.
And I will add to that, like, we've spoken to, guys, what works for one person is probably not going to work for you, but there are, 9 billion people out there. Utilize these other people in the world and get the cream. Design your masterpiece, get that cream from other people's information, and then go out there and design the life that you desire. Do something different and go out and have fantastic conversations with other people that set your heart on fire, just like we have today.
Thank you. And with that, thank you everyone for being part of this. And
thanks, guys.
Take care, everyone. Drop us some comments. Let us know